Hey, Damar.
Welcome everyone to the long-awaited, well-publicized, because Elston sends pictures to me to send to you to advertise, though you've probably seen some things on the Google group and are as eager as I am to hear about the 2015 trip to North Korea that he and Jackie made. And this is not being going to have closed captioning because it's a different process than the usual PowerPoint, but it is being recorded and Jackie will be handling the Q&A at the end. So here we go.
Jackie's going to handle the Q&A because she's much better. She embellishes. So anyways, thanks for coming. And we are going to talk about, okay, what happened? Is our guy still here? Okay, the cursor's not working. Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay, good. Okay. People always kept asking us, how did you go to the DPRK? As if going to North Korea was an impossible thing to do. In point of fact, it was the easiest thing in the world to do. All I had to do was send an email to this company in Beijing, operated by some Europeans that had been conducting tours to the DPRK for a number of years. I told them we wanted to go. They let me set up the itinerary. I told them I wanted it to be a group of 2 people. I sent them some money. Then I sent them some pictures, and then they gave me what you see here, our tourist card. Now we picked up a tourist card at their office in Beijing. When we got to Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, we gave them our tourist card. We gave them our passport. We never saw the tourist card again, and we didn't see our passports until we got back to the airport a week later. Prior to going, I wondered, I sent this picture of Jackie with the cameras, and I thought, how much of this can I get away with taking? And I said, how much of these cameras may I take along with us? And his response was, all of them. There were some restrictions when we got there. We weren't permitted to shoot out of the van. We weren't permitted to take the pictures into some locations. But when we wandered the streets, we were given complete freedom. We were told we were not to shoot soldiers. This was an interesting thing. We got to the Beijing airport. And by the way, another nice thing, because we were traveling to North Korea and going through Beijing, we never had to get a visa to go to Beijing. So we spent a couple days before and after, but at the Beijing airport, we are at the place to get on the plane. And you look at that cart and look at all the goodies there. You think that's for somebody special in North Korea? So we flew this Russian jet over to Pyongyang, the capital. We were told ahead of time certain do's and don'ts. One was for going through customs, we were to have no Bibles, no religious materials, and no guidebooks to visiting North Korea. So we got through pretty well. I had to turn the laptop on. The only thing that caused a little bit of problems was Jackie brought a novel along to read, but eventually that passed the muster, and we got through the bureaucracy. Now, they told us before we got there that don't worry about finding your guides. They'll find you. And sure enough, these were our 2 guides that we had for a week. Kim was 25 years old. She had been a guide for several years. And interestingly enough, she was very concerned at age 25 that she hadn't found a husband yet. You notice that nice suit she's wearing? I wondered where it came from when I asked her. Her mother made it. Her mother made her wardrobe. She was dressed impeccably the whole trip. Pac was interesting, 21 years old. And by the way, both of them spoke perfect American English. He was 21 years old. He was in his senior year at the university. He said his father was a businessman and he was going to be a businessman. So you now know that you can be a businessman in North Korea. Notice the pin that both of them have. And if you look at all the pictures we have of anyone of any stature in North Korea, you will see that they always wear, in this case, they're wearing a picture of their current Kim, the leader of North Korea. But mostly we saw people wearing pins with the pictures of the first two Kims, the eternal leaders of North Korea. We never debated ideology with them. I thought it would be stupid. When some things came up, we just let it pass over our heads. But we loved messing around with their minds. So, for example, one day they asked Jackie, do you have a car? And Jackie politely said, yes. She didn't say two. And then they said, how old were you when you learned to drive? And Jackie said 16, and they practically fainted. Another time I mentioned that when we got back to the United States, I was going to go to one of our national parks. And Pac said to me, you can do that? And so again, I wanted to mess with his mind. I said, of course. I said, come to our country, come stay with us. I gave him my business card. And then I said, you can just rent a car and drive all over the country. Now, keep in mind, in North Korea, for example, you can only go to the capital, Pyongyang, if you have paperwork. You see, this was taken on a subway car, and you see Kim carrying camera equipment for us, camera, Pac carrying a tripod. Not only was Kim impeccably dressed, she wore high heels the whole trip. When they found out that we like to hike, they said they'd take us on a hike, and one day they did in a park. We went up maybe a quarter mile up a steep dirt trail. Kim was wearing her high heels. The airport was out in the country, nothing else around it. It only had place for two airplanes to come up, but otherwise it was modern. And my understanding was there only like maybe a couple flights a day came in. It wasn't a busy airport, but it was absolutely out in the country, and it was only a few minutes ride to the downtown center of the capital. This is one reason I like to go to North Korea. If you look at the places Jackie and I have gone, we've done a lot of wilderness trips. And when we've gone to countries, it's been countries like Mongolia or Bhutan. But personally, as someone that was born in China, I never went back to China just because I couldn't cope with thinking about that many people. But on our way in to town, we passed the cemetery. From your seats, you probably can't see it, but the people on this died in 1951. This was a burial place for their soldiers from the Korean War. Pyongyang is laid out beautifully. During the Korean War, the United States flattened 98% of the infrastructure, the homes, the roads, and everything. There was nothing left. And so even before the war, Kim started plotting and planning, and so he could beautifully lay out the capital city. Nice wide streets. So we came in, and here was the Arc of Triumph. This Arc of Triumph, if you can see it, in enough detail, it says 1945. That was the victory over Japan. There's one difference between this Arc of Triumph and the one in Paris. This one is bigger. This is the hotel where we stayed, 40 stories high. I think we stayed on about the 32nd floor. We were gone for 2 days in the middle. And when we came back, we got the same room back. And we just always assumed it might be bugged and that we would never say anything that we didn't want to go beyond us. This is the lobby. You see the person to call the elevator the way we used to have it. You see a very nice lobby. The other thing is that we were on an island. So I took this picture from up at the 30th floor down. When we arrived at Kim took us out to the van, and we got in the van. I said to her, whatever you tell us, whatever rules there are, we'll abide by it. And you know, she looked very relieved. She told us that the guests the prior week had gone into town. You're not permitted to go anywhere on your own. The locals saw it. They reported to the authorities. The authorities brought it back. I think she got in trouble somewhat. What I found and I heard about even while we were there, it seems like when people go to North Korea, they think we got to see how far we can go with things. So anyways, we let them know that we were going to follow the rules, and she was very happy. So we were permitted to go down and walk around this island. There was some nice gardens there, but when we were left there on our own, we were not permitted to leave the island. This was the view out our hotel window of the river there. That's the Juche Tower up there. It's taller than the Washington Monument. It's a tower to their ideology, and it's the second tallest monument like that anywhere in the world. Off in the distance, and I'll have some more pictures later on, you see a stadium. That stadium was built in the late 80s. That's the biggest stadium on the planet. It seats 150,000 people. So the next morning was our first day to get out. Kim and Pac picked us up. We got in the van. We went over to this museum. And when we got out in the parking lot, I looked up and I couldn't believe this building up there. It was just huge. It's humongous. It's almost 1,100 feet high, almost 100 stories high, 4 rotating restaurants. Here's the story behind it. You know, after the Korean War, both Koreas were nothing countries. Both had dictators. Both were very poor. But in the 70s and 80s, South Korea evolved into a democracy, a strong economy, and in 1986, they got the Olympics. And they built the biggest, tallest hotel in the world. Well, Kim wasn't going to be number 2. So in 1987, he announced he was building the biggest hotel in the world. And so from 87 to 91, this huge concrete structure went up. And then the Soviet Union fell. There was no more sugar daddy. There was starvation. And the hotel sat there just this big piece of concrete for 2 decades. Then the Egyptians were paid. They came in and put glass. But this is still the largest unoccupied building anywhere on the planet. Now, after we left, by the way, did I say the Egyptians put the glass on it? After we left, they put LCD panels all down one side of it. You've seen that new magic ball in Las Vegas? Okay, they put on shows like that on one side of that now, but it is still unoccupied. Well, before we went into the museum, we were going to go visit something that I wanted to see. I never envisioned ever doing this. We had our own private tour. That's the guide we had to go on the SS Pueblo. The Pueblo is still commissioned in the United States Navy, the second oldest commissioned ship in the United States Navy. It was captured in 1968, an American spy ship. And that's the inside that looks very 60s. And it was a very embarrassing event. They were inadequately prepared. The materials were all over there for the Koreans just to come in and seize everything and know everything about the plan. When we got off the SS Pueblo, and but wait, this was our own personal tour, and from what I can tell, you know, most people in the world aren't like our generation. They don't even remember this event. So I think we could have been the only ones touring this. But they introduced us to this man, and they told us that he was one of the first people to board the Pueblo when it was seized. He was a very pleasant gentleman. And I asked to take his picture, and he said, oh, no. And he insisted that Jackie take a picture of the 2 of us together. We went over to a museum. At this point, I really don't remember the contents of the museum. But what I can tell you, that museums are very important in the DPRK. This museum is world class as far as the displays, the LED lighting, and everything about it. But what I was more interested in doing was the next event of our first day, and that is we went down the escalators to the deepest subway on the planet, which could be a bomb shelter as well. But see how long that escalator is, and there's still plenty up behind me. And unlike the light rail in Seattle, all of these escalators worked. We got down to the station, and you can see how palatial. I'll be showing you more in a moment. You notice no graffiti, how absolutely clean it is. When it was first built, the story that circulated around in the United States and other places was that this was a fake subway, and that these trains just came in and out, and the people got on and off to fool Westerners into thinking it was a real subway. I can tell you, we went 5 stops on it. We got off at the 3rd station. You see again how palatial it is in there. I was talking with Heiko, who has some experience and background with East Germany, and he told me it was the same way there in terms of making these palatial. When we went to leave, we got off at the station where the Arc of Triumph was. There were a lot of young people coming. They had been practicing because during that week we were going to be there for the biggest holiday of the year. This was one of the ladies working in the subway. One of the things that really surprised me that I was not prepared for was how many stunning looking buildings there are there. I suspect that they're more impressive on the outside, maybe a little bit like the Ani buildings across the street. For those of you who've toured inside, you know that it's more impressive on the outside. But there were quite a few modern apartments like this. Everywhere, of course, there were statues of Kim, regarded in a very religious way. I really liked the people. I found them very friendly and very nice. But clearly, this is a cult, and all over one sees the statues. Now, we went to visit a school. Some days and some things we did, I knew could not have been manipulated for us because we spent a number of days out on the highway. We're around different places. We walked the streets. But this obviously was an event. There were a number of other tourists came to this school. One thing I've also picked up is that I think the Koreans are, North Koreans are really into music. These 3 girls in their uniforms, they seemed very much into calligraphy. And then we went into an auditorium where the young ladies in the traditional Korean garb with traditional Korean string instruments played and sang for us. It was rather common when we went to visit places that there would be a greeter wearing traditional North Korean or Korean garb. Again, that's the Juche Tower. This is the library, the Grand People's Study House. We walked around the downtown Pyongyang, the capital, where in only about 3 days, the current Kim would be reviewing the big troops and things. And these were, I guess, the sort of business people out working. It looks a little different from Amazon land. Bicycles are a major mode of transportation there. Cars, they're just not a thing. You never need to worry about what rush hour traffic. Now this statue here, and I don't know, can you see over there, there's people, see how big the statues are by looking at those little dots to the left? Those are people there. This statue of Kim was built, I think, back in the 60s. The second Kim statue was only put up later on after he died. But the story I've read is that it was gold plated. And then the head of China came to visit. And China was, of course, keeping North Korea economically viable. And he expressed his displeasure over this ostentatious thing. So apparently the gold plating disappeared. This was a traffic circle. A lot of monuments, as I said, a lot of nice structures. This was the monument to the Workers' Party, the hammer, sickle, and brush. So our second day, this day we went out to a co-op farm. And even though we were the only ones there, certainly this was a show event. You know, I would be the first to acknowledge that. Here are people working in the fields. You know, something very interesting. We spent almost 3 full days riding around in the countryside. We saw one tractor that looked like it was something from the 1930s or the 1940s in the United States. That's it. The farming is manual. So is the street cleaning. And this is just out in the countryside, but everything is immaculately clean. This was the head of the co-op, very pleasant man, showed us around. Then he took us to one of the farmers' houses, and we sat in there and through our guides, chatted with the farmer. The thing about North Korea, as I understand it, is the state owns all of the houses, all of the apartments. And so what you get depends on your stature with the state. Then we went to see the nursery. This is where the children were taken care of while the parents were working out in the field. We went into a part of the nursery that was just a little older children. Now, what they're trying to do, and being the age you can understand, they were told to bow for us, and so they're in the process struggling to bow for us. And that little young lady at the very front, I don't know whether you can read on her, it says B-A-B-Y, baby. Then we went in to see an even older group, and they sang and they danced around in a circle, and then they invited Jackie to join in. This was a mosaic out by the farm of the original Kim, the founder. From what I have read, he did actually truly get out and mix among the peasants. Bicycles aren't for men only. Okay, we're in another town, and so these are some of the more basic workers that we caught walking as we walked around town. Then we were taken over to a high school, and this was an English class. And for 15 or 20 minutes, they asked us questions, nothing memorable, nothing that I can remember, but we had an interesting and fun time taking questions in English from them. When we got outside, we saw this couple. They just got married. And what better thing to do when you get married than to go have your picture taken in front of the statue of the founder of North Korea, the eternal leader. We went walking around in the town later that afternoon, and we saw young people dancing. My own interpretation is in a country where TV is primarily propaganda, where only a few people have cell phones and they're only usable for making phone calls and sending email. This would be a country a little bit like old America, where people did things like this. Pac asked Jackie if she would dance with him, and Jackie was a good sport. And so she danced with Pac in the streets of North Korea. walking by a house. The house was built right up to the sidewalk. This young man was looking out the window at us. They took us, the goal was to, one of the places we wanted to visit was, of course, the DMZ. And so we came over and down the coast, and they were very proud to show us this project built in the 1980s, a dam which separates the salt water from the fresh water. They took us to a Buddhist temple. We were supposed to meet the Buddhist monk, but it turned out that in 2 days there was this big special holiday, and he had gone to Pyongyang for the holiday, and so we never got to meet the Buddhist monk. The guy that booked our trip asked us, he said, would you like to go to the Museum of American Atrocities? He told us we didn't need to, that some people found it jarring. I said I would, and Jackie was a sport, and she eventually went too. Here are the two guides. Also, what I understand is that all young people in North Korea at some young age are brought through this museum. I'm only going to show you one picture. There were many murals like this. And from what I've read, you know, I think in most wars, unfortunately, war sometimes brings out the worst. But of course, the North Koreans, I think, like to make it much bigger and use it for propaganda. Now, the city we stopped in overnight before going down to the DMZ was Kaesong, and Kaesong is an interesting city. It used to be in American-occupied, what we would call South Korea, before the Korean War. But then, after the Korean armistice, they redrew the line. And so Kaesong is the only city in North Korea where there are still old buildings left. This was a young lady in the park painting a picture of one of those buildings. You see parents taking their children on the bikes. See the little backpack. I love this one. I don't know whether you can see it or not, but on that backpack it says princess. And there's two like princess type figures there. Two of them are blonde and one is redhead. Okay, on the fourth day, this is the place where they took us to a park. So it was, and I think there was also a waterfall, wasn't there, Jackie, that they wanted to show us, which was pitiful. But anyways, they were proud to take us up the trail, Kim in her high heels. But in the park, there were these men doing what you would see men all over. So, you know, this is the interesting thing I found about North Korea, is on the one hand, you've got this cult, you've got this big dictatorship, and on the other hand, you see people in so many ways leading somewhat normal lives. And again, I know that we saw a specific economic strata. These people there, they were workers. What we were told when we asked is that their bosses gave them the day off. They brought them up in a trailer and a big truck and gave them lunch and the day off up there. So now we made our way almost to the DMZ. This is Panmunjom. This is the building where the armistice was signed in July 1953. Remember, it was an armistice. The war is still not officially over. There's Jackie sitting at the table where the armistice agreement was signed. So now we're down on the DMZ. I'm sure many of you have seen pictures of this. Those blue buildings there, you see the little thing running between them. That marks the south side of the building is in South Korea. The other part is in North Korea. That's where they go when they have meetings, each sitting on their side of the DMZ. What I found really interesting is that building over there was in South Korea. Now, there were a number of soldiers here, and because this was the big sort of time of the year, there were a number of tourists up there where we were, but I never saw a single person on the South Korean side, just a lot of cameras up there, so we knew we were getting photographed real well. My understanding at the time we visited, at least in 2015, is that if you went to see the DMZ, you saw it through a scope about a mile away. Now, both South Korea and North Korea like to take the most big, badass soldiers they have and put them down there on the DMZ. And so there's Jackie with one of the North Korean soldiers on the DMZ. We came back up this highway. Impressive until I give you a little more. It was as wide as the I-5, 3 lanes on each side, all the way from the DMZ back to Pyongyang. There was only one problem with it, besides the fact there was almost no traffic on it. Our driver probably never drove more than 20 miles an hour because there were so many potholes he was weaving around to get us back up. But then the road eventually comes back into Pyongyang. This was the archery unification. You remember back in 2001, there was a lot more optimism that the two Koreas would be united. You see the 2 Korean women, one from each side, in their traditional dresses, holding a united Korea. This day, our 5th day, was probably the most boring, worthless day. What happened is I didn't realize we were being timed to be there during the biggest holiday. And at this point, we're riding into town, and these are soldiers getting organized for the parade that day. This is one picture I took through the window that I wasn't supposed to. And then we came in and we parked by this building that had flowers. And there was a flower show going on in celebration of this big holiday. The only problem was that someone apparently had predicted rain. It never rained that morning, so they put off their parade to the afternoon. So this is one of those times when it really paid to be a group of 2. This has been my experience on many travels. All the people in the buses sat in the parking lot for several hours, waiting for the parade. We were half a mile or so outside the center of town, so we were to wait for the parade to come up. And so they just had to sit there by their buses. There's no place to take them. But because we were just 2 people in a van, we went over to the department store with the elite shop in North Korea. We went down to the restaurant. And this woman, I understand, she went to bartending school. She's gone through all the loops to get her bartending license. Now, while we were down there eating lunch with elite of North Korea at other tables, this man came up, European-looking guy, and he talked with our guide. And he had a beer in his hand, and his talk, you could tell he was already, this is just lunchtime, he was already under the influence. But he chatted with our guide, and then he left, and she told us that he was one of the European guides with the European group that was there to visit North Korea. Well, we got back to the place where all the buses were, and so we're waiting there now, supposedly for a sort of non-event that was to happen, but we're waiting there for soldiers and whatever to march by, and this guy here, you know, that scares the bejeebies out of me. And when he said, "Don't step off the curb," I wasn't about to step off the curb. But that guide with the company whose one of their logos is, "This is not your grandma's tour," stuck his foot out. "Is this too far? Is this too far?" Somehow this military guy was patient, didn't do anything. The problem with the kind of tour he led is that in the evening, you know, we're a bunch of boring old folks. So we came back in the evening. We had no problem going to our room. I would work on editing the pictures. But when you take a bunch of young men, which is what they took on this edgy tour to North Korea, they drink at the bar until 2 or 3 in the morning. That group is the group that Otto was with when he had his unfortunate incident in North Korea. So we did have some soldiers come by. We did see more children, more soldiers, but it was really a nothing. And then, by the way, what I found really funny is I told you, despite these strict orders we were given, some of the Germans just got upset about waiting, and they just walked the streets back to their hotel. But anyways, there was a flyover of colors. And then it was this time of year when we went, and I suspect maybe they weren't on daylight savings time. So we got these night pictures. You can see the modern buildings out there, and I don't know whether you can see down below buildings that have more traditional Asian look to them. Day 6, we finally get to go see the dead bodies of the 2 eternal emperors. This is a palace that had been around, constructed by Kim. And somewhere around 2013, a couple years before we arrived, they converted it in a place for the bodies. And apparently they got the Russians to help them because the Russians had experience with Stalin at this embalming. Now, besides the bodies in there, they had a lot of their personal effects, fancy Rolls Royce limos, other stuff. And then they had the train car where the second Kim died. Now, I couldn't help but just make a little poke fun when they took us in there. And here was the cigarette tray filled with burnout stubs. And, you know, both the second Kim and the current Kim, his son, love to smoke. They love fine European whiskeys and whatever. And you've seen the pictures of Kim. I think there's a lot of speculation as to whether this Kim will die fairly young. Anyway, there's Kim, all dressed up in a traditional North Korean garb to go in there. When we went in and we stopped at each side of the bodies, Kim had tears in her eyes. Now, I've been warned that I would need a tie to see the dead bodies. And so the only time I've worn a tie in the last 22 years was this tie that I went down and bought at Ross for Less before we went to North Korea. It was interesting too when we got in there. There was at least a half a mile of electric sidewalks. I mean, this place is ostentatious. And you know, I'm used to SeaTech where only 2 out of 3 of them work, but there, every one of them worked. Some young people that we saw after we visited. These buildings here were almost finished. The next month, this was going to be housing for the scientists in North Korea. Think about it. Maybe they're nuclear scientists, maybe they're rocket scientists, and maybe some of those tech scientists who hacked American computers. There's the stadium, and out there you can see, just like South Lake Union, people out there enjoying a nice day on little rowboats. So late that afternoon, we went down to walk around the city of Pyongyang, the capital, and we started our walk at the Opera House. And guess what? More dancing. And you will notice no 2 dresses are alike. I am sure they're all handmade. They say that the North Korean women are the most beautiful women on the planet. You can decide for yourself, but they are very pretty. Another young man, his parents brought him up. Now, all week long, I wanted a picture of one of those traffic ladies. And I didn't get it, and I thought I wasn't going to get it. And then as we were walking down the street up there, I saw a traffic lady. Now, what do you call that grassy area along sidewalks? Anyways, whatever it is, there was on the side I was on, the opposite side, there was this grassy area. And so I stepped on there to take pictures of her, and the guides immediately told me, oh no, we don't walk on the grass in Pyongyang. So I got back on the sidewalk, walked over to the corner, and I started firing away. You can see she's ticked. She marched over to our guides, and we marched away. And then we started retreating back to where we knew the vehicle in the opera house was. She wanted to know, who are these people and what are they doing? But fortunately, we kept our pictures. Streets are clean, no homeless, no graffiti. I think some Americans would find it paradise. That evening, we went to the bowling alley. We had passed up on going to the amusement park and the zoo. But anyways, this is the bowling alley. And fortunately, we had already had dinner, or we could have had hot dogs. And do you remember the current Kim, during his high school years, went to school in Switzerland. So we got to take some pictures that evening. What happened is our guides were suddenly very attentive about what can we do for you. And I knew that the next day we'd be leaving and that their whole compensation for the week would be essentially our tip. And so we said, we want to get night pictures. So we got a number of night pictures that evening. And sometimes they looked a little bit nervous about taking us around, setting up the tripods and everything, but we got to do it. Now, they had also asked us if we would like to go see this girl rock band, and we said we would, and this was a concert hall. And I want to tell you, Banner Royal Hall is shabby by comparison to this. When we got in there, we sat in chairs, big red cushiony chairs. We had 2 big wood armrests, which we did not share with the next chair. The acoustics, the lighting, all the video stuff and all the rest going on behind them, it was state of the art. I wasn't permitted to take my camera in. I could see that they had their own cameraman there with definitely state of the art camera equipment. Anyway, we watched the first half. The ladies sang these songs in Korean. And for some reason, I think the leader in North Korea, he loves these girl rock bands. So as they wound up before the intermission, guess what they played? Oh, I wish I were in the land of Dixie. And then we came back and they played some more songs, patriotic songs, and there were pictures of their jets flying, and then there were pictures of the bad Americans, and then there was a picture of the current leader, and the woman seated in the chair beside me went ecstatic, and she was bouncing up and down and clapping to see her great leader up there on the screen. So after we left, we did a little more photography. This was the train station that was built, I think, either in the late 50s or early 60s. On our way back, flying from Pyongyang to Beijing, and because we were Americans, we were not permitted to take the train back. But I sat next to this businessman, American businessman, who helped other American businessmen make contacts in South Korea. And I was talking with him, and he told me that the northern half of North Korea was more edgy. And by the way, remember that prior to World War II, traditionally, North Korea was the strong economic part of the country. That was where the coal mines were. That was where the manufacturing was. That was the second strongest economy in Asia. No one ever expected this little backward farming community in the bottom to get anywhere. But anyways, he told us that it was more edgy and we knew we could arrange. And so we were going to arrange to go back and visit the other part of North Korea. But unfortunately, in 2017, the United States announced the Americans could not visit there. One of the peculiar things I find is that when our president left office, one of the cherished things he took to Mar-a-Lago was his love letters from Kim. Anyways, I'll let Jackie answer any questions.
Questions? Before the questions start, I just have one little story that I want to share that Elston may or may not like, but I just loved it. So here's the embellishment. My guide asked me a question. Now remember, no Bibles, no religious thought ever. And he says to me, do you believe in God? And I thought, my chance. And I said to him very clearly, I believe in my like you in your leader. And he was just dumbstruck.
Andy, I was wondering about the haze. It looked a little hazy. Was that just happened to be a cloudy day, or was it polluted?
It was not polluted. As I recall, it was perfectly clear the whole time we were there.
I noticed that the teenagers were wearing red scarves, and in Cuba, that meant they were part of the pioneer communist movement. Was there something, did you ever ask what are those red scarves and why are they wearing them?
Well, I think we sort of knew it was just because of the communist country with a dictator. And that was their symbol.
Jackie, we hear so much about the great poverty among the common people. This is a real disconnect with what we've heard.
Yes, I'm sure that's true. What we saw was what they permitted us to see. However, in our country rides, what I saw were roofs with corn on them. I saw very little industrialization. We knew the country people were probably not faring well. However, we did get taken into a farmhouse, and it was totally set up because there were nice seats and nice living room. And what they put there was one of their military decorators, soldiers whose parents had the house. So we could draw our own conclusions much of the time that all was not as great as it looked.
What is the protocol for taking pictures and how are they received?
We
You got permission?
We walked the streets one evening and lots of native people were walking in the streets with their children. They came up to Elston with his candle and begged him to take their pictures. So pictures are something that is quite okay. There was one place, Elston showed you one picture of the defamation of the perception of the war and the just horrible treatment of the American soldiers that were massacred. I went in once and absolutely was so disgusted and hurt that I could not go in a subsequent one. It was so bad. Horrible.
Questions?
Yes.
I gather from your pictures that there are hordes of tourists in North Korea. In fact, I was going to ask you, how many did you actually see while you were there?
We had in the hotel, there were a number of different groups of people. As Elston, I think, mentioned, many were Koreans.
Chinese.
But
There were quite a few Chinese, as I said, busloads of them, and they like to come to North Korea because it reminds them of what China was like 4 decades ago, more rural, more peasant.
in the hotel, we did get them breakfast with all these other visitors. So many of them were from China, but there were very few Americans.
Question.
What was your understanding of the relationship of Buddhism in North Korea?
Well, we almost got to one temple where we were supposed to meet the Buddhists, and it didn't happen. So my understanding is, if it's there, it's well hidden.
I just wondered if anybody else here has been to North Korea. I know that Dean and Gail Temple have, but they're traveling right now, so you'll have to ask them about stories or what year they went when they come back to Mirabella. Anybody else been?
I will, Judy.
When we were first at Mirabella, it was probably 10 years ago, we had a speaker, a man from Seattle who had gone to, it looked very different. There weren't the beautiful buildings. It looked much more shabby or depressing. And so it looks like they've made progress.
Tremendous progress. All that progress. Oh, I had one other thing to add to Elston's great talk, and that was, that I got to dance. Got to dance with some little babies, and we got to dance with them. And when they asked me to dance, it really was just, I didn't know how to handle it because
Yes, I saw a photo of a hot dog. Just wanted to know how much is a hot dog in all?
I didn't look at what the price was, but I believe in the bowling alley, hot dogs were the thing to get along the popcorn.
Prices there, for example, we bought all our drinking water, and believe me, we got so much drinking water for a couple dollars. And our whole trip, including the flight from Beijing and having, 2 guides and a van. And oh, I should have mentioned the van. We never saw a service station. They carried, some 5-gallon cans in the back to use to tank up. But our whole trip cost us each $3,000. So I don't think it's an expensive country in terms of our money.
I was just wondering, what kind of food did you eat? Did you eat a lot of the local foods, or was it all set up for you, in a North American style?
There was only one time we got dessert, so that I would get something from the food. It wasn't bad. But it wasn't really big. And the only time that we got the dessert was when we were in the department store. They had a nice little bar area in the lower level, and we actually could have dessert while we were waiting for the parade to start. Well, everybody else was in the bus. We were doing fun things.
Let's see, any other questions? Okay, and while I'm walking over there, I want to remind people that the second Tuesday of each month is when we have resident revelations. And next month, on November 14th, Sally Heyman will be telling us her story of the reluctant archaeologist, which is her personal story. So you won't want to miss that.
Did you see any pets, dogs, cats?
I didn't know.
Jackie, there are several big sports arenas, stadiums, did you get to experience any sport events?
No, we didn't have any. It wasn't really high on this. We were more interested in the country, the countryside. When we were in the mountain, for example, one of the employees of the workers had brought a whole group up to the mountain to celebrate at this waterfall. And I was looking forward to seeing it because I love the mountains and I love the outdoors. And when we got there, the waterfall was like a trickle. It was barely coming down to something.
Regarding the games, one thing, see, I think that stadium was built out of this nationalistic spirit. And the biggest thing they have are what's called the mass games. And they're not games like we have. I suggest you go to YouTube. You know, there's a lot of interesting stuff and you can learn quickly to filter out the kooks. But they have these mass games, and there was a thing I saw, the kids practice for months. And I mean, the intensity of it. And then that whole stadium that seats 150,000 people is filled up. And on one side, it's solid, just students holding up the color cards And they do it in unison without, there's not a flaw in it at all. And if a person could ever get to go see that, now that would be amazing.
Precision is a word that would describe when we actually did get to see the parade and the flying of the jets. It was, but remember, Elston used to be a battleship. So I don't think just emphasize that real heavy. Question?
Anybody else? I think we're about at 4:30, so I'm sure Elston and Jackie could answer more questions later as you see them up front or around. Thank you so much, and if you all would like to join us.